Brother warriors, we are about to enter an engagement from which I shall not return. My body will remain on the field of battle. With these words, Chief Tecumseth, leader of the Indian troops, wrote his own epitaph. For it was on a gloomy October 5th, 1813, that the voice of this exceptional man and gifted orator was forever silenced, but not forgotten. It was only 80 years later that a bill was presented to the House of Assembly of Upper Canada naming a new township in the county of Simcoe. Its name would be Tecumseth, after the courageous warrior. Tecumseth, or Tecumseth, means one who moves quickly from one place to another. How fitting are these words of those who came to make a life for themselves and their families in this picturesque township in the Nottawasaga Basin southwest of Lake Simcoe. Its history is one resonant with stories of ordinary people meeting extraordinary circumstances, forging for themselves a new existence from a wilderness grown out of an ice age and its reverberations. From the indigenous peoples who inhabited the region for thousands of years to the pioneers that settled the area, all have come to shape the land and the history that have given rise to the present town, New Tecumseth. With the retreat of the glaciers of the last ice age, meltwaters flooded vast areas of Simcoe County, creating what geologists now call Lake Algonquin. With time, the lake receded, and in its wake a landscape of great biological diversity and beauty developed. It was to this evolving world that the first inhabitants were attracted. Little is known of the first peoples, but archaeologists believe the area was first inhabited between 8,000 and 6,000 BC, with some settlements in the years up to the 1600s. The area, however, appears to have been largely unoccupied after this period until the 19th century. In 1818, the land was ceded from the Indians, and in 1819, the surveyor, Gabriel Lount, began to mark out the 68,500 acres of Tecumseth Township. Settlers followed in ever-increasing numbers. They came first by way of King Township, across the route of the present Highway 9. Following surveyors' marks and trails, they pushed further and further into the southeast regions of the township, toiling to clear the forest, break the ground, and build a life.
In the year 1822, we removed to Tecumseth, that was then quite new. There may have been at the time a dozen families living within its bounds. They were scattered and had small improvements and corresponding houses and shanties to match. Now, the settlement of a new township is particularly interesting to every person engaged therein. His hopes and fears, disappointments and successes follow one another in such rapid succession, joined to hard toil and severe labor and exposure to all weather.
When these words of the Irish immigrant Richard Rourke were written, settlement was still young in the new township. It would be over the next 70 years that Tecumseth was to evolve, forming vibrant communities filled with the fervent spirit of the first pioneers. Duncarron was the first hamlet on the Tecumseth-West Gwillimbury town line, the current Highway 27. On the north side of the third concession, Lot 24, Peter Doyle built his first house, a two-story brick house complete with a bake oven in the basement. Across the road from him was his friend Henry Nolan, the first wagon maker. Both were Quakers, members of the Religious Society of Friends. A number of these experienced pioneers were second-generation Canadians whose families had originally populated Pennsylvania and New York State and had emigrated north to Upper Canada. On land donated by Doyle, the Quakers built a meeting house, which was dismantled in 1919. Now there is only the cemetery and an historical plaque as testaments to the pioneering role of these people. On the West Gwillimbury side of the town line, a number of Irish immigrants from Armagh came together in community, building for themselves and their Quaker neighbors a school to the east and a post office that thrived from 1884 to 1915. They also constructed a Methodist church, which still stands among the old gravestones. Little of Dunkerron's commercial past exists now. Good farms and pleasant houses tell today's story. Settlers, following the paths of those who had gone before, moved into Tecumseth, spreading out along the 3rd, 4th, and 5th concessions. Adna Penfield, a farmer from Connecticut, was one of Tecumseth's first settlers. Around his land on Concession 4, Lot 18, grew the small hamlet of Pennville. In the 1830s, the crossroads of the 5th concession and the recently created Side Road 18 held one of the most enterprising communities in the township. There were houses, stores, shoemakers, carpenters, a tavern, and an Orange Hall, a reminder of Protestant Irish roots. By the 1840s, the fertile lands wrested from the forest were beginning to provide surplus crops. The Pennville area was adding to the loads of wheat moving from Tecumseth to the city markets. The village was growing and gaining a name for itself. When a site was needed for the first township hall, Pennville was chosen. It was at this hall that orator William Lyon Mackenzie spoke during a political meeting in 1837, the year of the rebellion. By the 1870s, the town boasted the Wesleyan Methodist Church and great plans for the future. That was until 1877, when the Hamilton and Northwestern Railway ushered in a new era for Tecumseth. On its northerly route through Tottenham, Beaton, and Alliston, on its way to Collingwood, it bypassed Pennville. Just as the railway was instrumental in opening up these other communities, it spelled the end of continued prosperity for Pennville. Without the railroad, the hamlet eventually grew silent. Today, only faint reminders of its once dynamic past remain. As Yonge Street, the government road, improved, people gradually moved into Tecumseth through West Gwillimbury, along the 6th and 7th concessions to the town line. It was at the junction of the present Highway 27 and 88 that the hamlet of Bondhead was born. It was named in 1837 for the Lieutenant Governor of Upper Canada, Sir Francis Bondhead. The village was a stopover point for teamsters transporting agricultural products to market from nearby settlements. By 1850, Bondhead was a thriving community with a population of 400, served by 2 general stores, 4 blacksmiths, shoemakers, a tannery, a grist mill, and 3 hotels. In 1851, the only plank road north of Toronto was opened from Bondhead to Bradford, along the present Highway 88. When the Northern Railway reached Bradford in 1853, the plank road became an important trade and travel route. It was a prosperous time. In 1837, Reverend Featherstone Osler became the first Anglican priest of a parish which in time was served by 2 churches. He and his wife Ellen took up residence in a converted cattle stable. Snow covered half the kitchen floor, and milk kept near the stove was sometimes frozen. Osler's first services were conducted in houses and barns, often to the accompaniment of barking dogs, cackling hens, and wailing infants. After he threatened to leave the parish if better accommodations were not provided, the people collected $365 to build a house and church on the 7th line. It was here, in their cottage on the hill, just half a mile west of Bondhead, that their 8th child, a boy, was born in 1849. Because of the date, July 12th, he was named after William of Orange. The lad had a stormy elementary education and went on to excel at university and as a physician and pathologist, and became one of the most influential pioneers of modern medicine. Only a cairn remains near the location, marking the birthplace of the world-renowned physician Sir William Osler. A frame structure, St. John's, an Anglican church on the 6th line, was built by 1837. It served for over 40 years, and when the present brick church replaced it in 1881, the elderly Reverend Featherstone Osler revisited Tecumseth for the official opening. The Oslers had been joined in this same year by other members of the English gentry. The prosperous times of the mid-1800s is evident in some of the heritage buildings that still remain. Squire Joseph Williams' Regency Cottage, similar to the Osler Rectory, may have been designed by John Howard, the architect of Colburn Lodge in Toronto's High Park. The home on the 7th line has been designated and plaqued as a Tecumseth-Lacac heritage site. Squire Williams' son-in-law, Alexander Gaveler, built a 16-room, 2-story frame home complete with ballroom and servants' quarters. This home still commands a scenic view of Bond Head. In 1885, the church which developed on the 7th line was moved on rolling logs to Bond Head. In 1833, John Kurzweil purchased his 200 acres for £75 from the Canada Company. He built a water-powered sawmill as he cleared the forest and a Georgian-inspired 2-story brick dwelling house. His descendants have gained international recognition in the breeding of Holstein cattle. The Brazel name appeared in Bond Head in 1822. By 1835, they were in possession of the 3 corners of the hamlet. About 1845, Patrick Brazel built a fine 2-story brick house. Following a 20-year restoration period, this home has recently been designated an historic property under the Ontario Heritage Foundation. Another restored building, the Orangemen's Meeting Hall, was moved to a new site behind the Brazel House and now serves as a cabinet-making shop. The preservation and restoration effort of individual residents is well illustrated by these 2 beautiful heritage buildings. In the late 1800s, 2 separate fires ravaged the north and south sides of the main street, destroying all the original frame buildings. The Simcoe House escaped the fire and still remains as one of the 2 surviving buildings which were originally hotels. The post office remains as one of the chief meeting places where people gather to exchange news and gossip, just as they did in their first post office in 1837.
Well, my first memories were of the storekeepers and that were here at the time. We had 2. One storekeeper was here for years and years. His son took over the business and he carried on then too. And the other store across the road was just the same way. They were very friendly. One storekeeper, even in order to help people out when the telephone was first brought into this district, every town had a different phone, like Beaton, Cookstown, Schaumburg, and Bradford. That was the 4. So he put 3 of the phones in at his place, and a big portion of his time was taken up conveying messages that you'd phone to him to call somebody else on the other phone, and he would convey the message to them. You could phone them by going through a central, you see, or a long distance. But it was going to cost you 15 or 20 cents to phone Beaton. So back in those early years, the 15 or 20 cents was better in your pocket if he would convey the message. So this is what he spent a great deal of his time doing instead of waiting on the store. Therefore, he had to get a helper in the store, get a clerk, or you'd go and help yourself. That's about it, and leave it on the counter, and then he'd come and tell you how much it all was, and pay him up or mark it down, and that's the way the life was earlier on, in that way. Pay it up once a week whenever you get your money in, or whenever you got the money, that's the thing.
Along the eastern town line and concession roads, more farms appeared as the pioneers pushed north. The great mature forests of pine and oak attracted men planning to build mills as well as barns and houses. In 1832, on the 10th Concession and 20th Side Road, Hiram Bigelow, a Quaker, built the first grist mill in Tecumseth Township. Soon there followed a brickworks, houses, an inn, strictly dry, and a store built by William Chandler, another Quaker from the Duncarron meeting. However, as the town line came to carry most transport, the 20th Side Road and its commerce withered. Chandler moved his log store east to the town line, now Highway 27. This junction, known as Latimer's Corners, was named after Thomas Latimer, who had established a thriving inn on the southeast corner. The hamlet was renamed Newton Robinson in 1848 after a town in Ireland and the Honorable William Benjamin Robinson, a member of the family compact and the local member of Parliament. Quakers John and Isaac Merrick developed a thriving woolen mill in 1843, followed by a sawmill, grist mill, sash and door factory, and construction business. There was a tannery, a cheese factory, and an Orange Lodge Hall, which is now the Tecumseth Women's Institute Hall. By 1908, the early building years had ended, and with a depression in Ontario, many young men moved west. Newton Robinson could not compete with the towns that had railways. The tannery equipment was sold to a buyer from Bradford, and the machinery of the woolen mill was dismantled and moved to Alliston, where manufacturing was increasing. In 1856, when Robert Clark, a blacksmith, was handed the deed to Lot 10, 8th Concession, little did he realize that he had created the beginning of the village of Beaton. People were first attracted to the area by Robert Clark's blacksmithing services. Soon the hamlet began to grow. It was known as Clarksville. Around 1860, a man named David Allenson Jones was drawn to this small community. He was to become its most influential resident. In June of 1867, he acquired his first 50 acres, and over the succeeding years became the largest land speculator in the area. At one point, he owned nearly all the land on which the village developed. To his credit, he had the main streets surveyed and planted with maple trees on both sides. Some of these great trees stand today. He held the postmaster's position for some 50 years, but most interesting of all, he kept bees. D.A. Jones holds the distinction of being Canada's first commercial beekeeper. In 1870, he bought his first 2 swarms of bees, and from that time on, his enterprise blossomed. Over time, this purchase developed into large-scale honey production, an achievement that gave him local and international recognition as the Bee King. One important result of Jones' efforts was that the village eventually came to be known as Bee Town, and then Beaton, as it was officially incorporated in 1874. Just like Tottenham to the south, the coming of the railway played a key role in the building of Beaton, and by the 1890s, the Beaton streets were a hive of activity. At its core, standing on the northeast corner of the main intersection, was the Queen's Hotel. Built sometime before 1884, the hotel was one of the finest north of Toronto, supplying its travel-weary patrons with the best of amenities. Its 3-story brick construction made it an impressive sight for its time. It flourished over the years, but was unfortunately demolished after a developer purchased the land. As with most villages in the mid-19th century, much of the construction in Beaton was of readily available timber. This made the buildings inexpensive but susceptible to fire. It was on October 19, 1892, that tragedy struck. In under 4 hours, flames destroyed a large number of the businesses and homes in what older residents still refer to as the Great Fire. But Beaton citizens chose to resurrect the small village from the ashes. The building frenzy that ensued created a need for a new seat of government for the village's municipal affairs. On February 5, 1895, the new Beaton Town Hall was opened. On the first floor were the council chambers. On the floor above was the opera house, with its slanted floor and orchestra pit. Many touring and local acts graced the stage over the years, providing a wide variety of entertainment. Over time, the ownership of the town hall has passed through many hands. Today, it stands as the home of the Record Sentinel, Beaton's weekly newspaper.
They were soon built after the fire. And as people had been wanting to have it built, they needed a town hall, and the council weren't doing much about it. But when the people started to establish their business and get things going in the village, then the town hall was built. And the first things I remember about it are the entertainments that they used to have. The Beaton used to celebrate the 24th of May and the 3rd of June, and the Beaton Fair used to be mostly in October then, and they would have concerts at night, you know, and talent from Toronto, and they had, the floor was sloped, and they had a wonderful big stage with blue and gold curtains, and it was really something to go and enjoy that sort of entertainment. And there was one local event that is remembered by a lot of people. I think I was about 9 years old when my my music teacher, Miss Georgina Barton, put on Pinafore with all local talent. And it was really marvelous. Every person in the country came to see Pinafore in Beaton. And that was in the town hall. That was the upstairs part. Well, in the downstairs part was the courthouse, and they had a lockup. And I think it was 3 different sections to the lockup. They could have 3 prisoners there at once. And the women in Beaton got paid 25 cents each meal that they fed to these prisoners. And as well as the courthouse, there was the farmers' market. A man came from Toronto every Tuesday, and the people would bring in their geese and ducks and butter and eggs and that sort of thing. And then at the back of it was a bell tower, and there was a person in the town who would always ring the bell at 7 in the morning, at noon, at 1 o'clock, and 6 o'clock. And one man rang it for over 20 years. And the last person who rang that bell was a lady, Georgina Riley. And when people saw her going up the street, they knew it was going to be just about time to ring the bell.
It's believed that Tottenham, an hour's walk from Beaton, was named for Alexander Totten, a farmer who arrived in the area around 1825 from Ireland. Alexander retired in a Georgian-style home in the hamlet and remained until well after the incorporation of the village in 1884. One key element in the evolution of this small village in the western part of the township was the coming of the railway in 1878. Tottenham might very well have disappeared had it not been for this single formative event in its history. Unlike nearby Kenansville, which the railway bypassed, Tottenham was ushered into a new age when the Hamilton and Northwestern Railway steamed into town. With the arrival of the CPR in 1907, Tottenham had established itself as a 2-railway town, complete with a passenger service that continued until 1960. The rich rail history of Tottenham remains alive to this date, preserved through the diligent efforts of the South Simcoe Railway Heritage Corporation. This group of rail enthusiasts has struggled for the last 20 years to restore and maintain old trains and rail lines. Their most exciting acquisition was the century-old steam locomotive used in the filming of the railroad epic The National Dream. Today, it pulls a tourist train on a short journey between Tottenham and Beaton. It was on June 20th, 1992, that this run was opened, to the delight of 600 passengers, with thousands more taking advantage of this historic ride over the following months. One of the early enterprises was the mill. Built in 1865 by George Nolan, an Irish immigrant, it was originally called the Avoca Mill. Its location was on Beaton Creek, which was dammed to supply water to the large overshot water wheel. The resulting pond enhanced village life for more than a century and is now the focal point of a beautiful conservation area. The mill, an historic landmark, still stands on its original site and today provides local farmers with animal feed. 4 years after its incorporation, Tottenham's tree-shaded streets boasted a wide variety of industries and businesses, including a hardware store, a furniture factory, a bank, a foundry, 8 general stores, and 2 hotels. The Maple Leaf Hotel at the northwest corner of Mill and Queen Streets was a marvel for its time. Finished in 1886, this 3-story brick building was equipped with hot air heating, flush toilets, gas lighting, and a water system designed by its owner, M.J. Casserly. These were the glory days for Tottenham, a time of great growth and prosperity. Unfortunately, the succeeding years were not as kind to the village. In 1895, a devastating fire started by sparks from the foundry destroyed 80 businesses and homes in the southern end of town. Even the help of the Beaton and Alliston fire departments couldn't stop the destruction. Nearly 60 years later, Hurricane Hazel swept out the mill dam, leaving barely a trickle. And in 1983, a major part of Tottenham's past was erased when the Maple Leaf Hotel, operating as the Tottenham Inn, was leveled in a spectacular blaze. Much of the town was rebuilt after the 1895 fire, and the dam quickly repaired after the 1954 storm. But time and changing economics had begun to take their toll on the village. With the Depression and the switch from rail to trucking as a key part of transporting goods, Tottenham began to shrink, eventually reaching a population of only 822 in 1968. Recently, however, new industry and residential property development related to the town's commuting proximity to Toronto revitalized the village. Today, some 3,500 residents enjoy the pleasant small-town community atmosphere which the village provides.
It was October the 15th, 1954, when Hurricane Hazel hit us. And of course, we didn't realize it was a hurricane, but we knew there was torrential rain, and the sound was just terrible. I remember when they phoned my husband to come quickly, that the dam had gone. You couldn't hear it. You couldn't hear on the telephone. And the operator, of course, there was a hand operator, you know, a switchboard operator, and our number was 20. And she got on the line and explained to him that the dam had broken and he must come right away. And he went, and a little house at the foot of the dam was washed away, and there were a man and his 2 sons in it, and the 2 of them got out, but the other fellow went with the building, and it went a whole concession in the flood. And actually, he got caught up in a tree and was saved, and they got him out all right. And so we didn't have a death in town at all, but we were without the pond for a good 3 or 4 years but they spent the time cleaning the dam out, and the bottom of the pond was full of logs, and they cleared it all out. And so after it was, the dam was rebuilt, why, we had good swimming.
At the time of peak wheat production, the two townships of Tecumseth and West Gwillimbury were referred to as the breadbasket of Canada. The Northern Railway, which reached Bradford in 1852, served to solidify this reputation and provide easier access to markets in time for the township to benefit from shortages created by the Crimean War and the American Civil War. Wheat dominated until the supplies from Western Canada in the late 1800s and early 1900s became more plentiful. The farms continued to prosper by conversion to mixed farming. The Great Swamp, also called the Beaten Swamp, which existed until recent times, had developed on the bed of the ancient Lake Algonquin, a remnant of the last ice age. This huge flat area made up most of the central area of the township. Its marsh and thick cedar growth prevented the settlers from moving into the central township. Rather, they went north and west along the present Highway 89 in early times. Gradually, the swamp was cleared as farmers needed wood supplies. The drainage was continued by the township into the present time. The lake-deposited soils have produced an abundance of tobacco, potatoes, sod, asparagus, and other cash crops such as beans. Farming has, of course, always formed an integral part of the development of the township. From the dairy farming and cash crops of the uplands in the south to the beef and hog production of the northern uplands to the yields of the swamp, Tecumseth farming has had a history as varied as the landscape that has produced it.
I enjoyed plowing with a single plow and my team of horses that I loved very much. And I never loved a tractor like I did the horses. And then the tractor came, and I was very healthy up till that point, and then I had back trouble once I started with the tractor, the vibration of the implement, you know. But it done the work so fast. What happened was labor was the whole thing. So many young farmers, their sons went to manufacture because they could get far more wages than we could pay. And the tractors took the place of these young people that went into cities and into the manufacturing industries.
In the last 40 years, it's gone from being more mixed to a more specialized, where instead of the mixed aspect, people have specialized in one area, whether it's been in cash cropping or in dairy farming, where they've, you know, just strictly milk producers or beef farms, and that's basically it's changed a lot that way. And the farms have become more modernized, a lot more with the introduction of computers and that. They're being used on farms today with computer feeders and you know, even the machinery that you buy. A lot of the tractors have computers on them now, and it's very much more technical. I think the future of the family farm is good. Most of the farms are still basically family farms. It's just that the size has increased. You know, the overall operation is increased in size, but I think the whole backbone of the township has been the family farm, and I can't see that really changing in the future. Well, actually, this farm has been in our family since 1849, and I'm the 6th generation on this farm, which I'm kind of proud of that. And it started off, you know, they when they first settled it, they settled it for the timber that was on it, and it's been cleared, and you know they grew the crops and had the mixed operation. Well, it's been about the last 35 years, I guess, we've kind of concentrated more on dairy, and we've been strictly a dairy operation since then. Well, we do sell a bit of cash crop, but we're basically strictly in dairy.
As more settlers moved into the swamp area, a hamlet on the 13th concession evolved called Thompsonville. Named after one of its first settlers, Thomas Thompson, the hamlet was registered in 1856. Arriving in Tecumseth around 1850, Thompson and his sons built several mills in the area, powered by a dam on the Nottawasaga River. Toward the end of the 19th century, a businessman named William Train, along with his partner, bought the Thompson Mills. This purchase was followed by a full survey of the west side of the Nottawasaga River. The survey clearly outlined Train's grand plan for Thompsonville. At the height of its prosperity, toward the end of the 19th century, Thompsonville boasted a woolen mill, a sawmill, and a grist and flour mill, along with a general store, hotel, church, and post office. It was during this time that Margaret Grant lived in the hamlet and married William Banting. They became the parents of Sir Frederick Banting, co-discoverer of insulin. Thompsonville's mills and other enterprises would eventually be absorbed by the nearby town of Alliston, leaving behind the rural tranquility of today. With continuous growth northward, more settlers came to the township. One was an English immigrant, William Fletcher, who came to Lot 15, Concession 3 in 1821. Fletcher worked on Toronto area farms until he was able to afford his own. William worked this piece of land for the next 26 years, along with his wife Margaret and their 3 sons. William and his eldest son, John, struck out in search of a site on which to build a mill. After a few attempts, they discovered a site in Essa Township, Lot 1, Concession 1. The land they found was flat, swampy, and inhospitable. But to William, it meant opportunity. He was interested in the water privileges of the land and gambled that the swamp, in the near future, would become productive. He proved himself right, for this settlement, which came to boast over 1,200 acres, a sawmill, and a grist mill, grew to be the town of Alliston. It occupies the corners of 4 townships, Essa, Tosserantio, Agila, and Tecumseth. In 1849, the Fletchers built a frame residence which remained in the family for many years. After the naming of Alliston in 1856, the house held the first post office with William's second son, George, as postmaster. By the time Alliston officially became a town in 1891, schools, churches, and a railway were all part of everyday town life. It was in that same year that the town saw its first real setback. Like the history of so many Tecumseth villages and hamlets, Alliston suffered a great fire. On the afternoon of May the 8th, the inferno which started in the stables of the Queen's Hotel spread quickly. When it was over, the fire had reduced 30 acres of the town to smoldering ruin, leaving many families homeless and a majority of the businesses destroyed. Because it was a significant center for agricultural services, Alliston had to recover fast. Waterworks were installed, a town hall built, and fire protection improved. Just after the turn of the century, the CPR rolled into town for the first time. With it came a pride to the community and a business spirit which continues to flourish to the present. With the outbreak of the First World War, the failed farms on the sand dunes north of Alliston became the site of Camp Borden. This made a great impact on the social and economic life in town through World War II and even modern times. Today, Alliston is a modern, progressive community and agricultural service center attractive to large industries like Honda and numerous other activities in need of good access to transport and an industrious workforce. Alliston is indeed the leader of the new town of New Tecumseth.
At one point, we had a bridge go through with a tank from the base. It was Camp Borden then. And the council and mayor got quotes on building a new bridge and repairing, etc. And they thought they were all too high, so they went out and they bought the material themselves, and they built the bridge, all with volunteer help. It was all repaired and replaced. And that was the community way to do things. The local arena was built the same way. There was only one paid man on that job, and you would see everybody in town doing a little bit. I can remember the Roman Catholic priest painting seats, and the minister, one of the ministers, I think it was from the Presbyterian Church, he was helping nail the boards up for the hall up in the arena. So everybody chipped in to do the work.
1991 marked the formation of a new amalgamated town in Simcoe County, announced by the province of Ontario. By January 1st, 1992, it had chosen a name for itself, New Tecumseth. It includes the old township of Tecumseth from Highway 9 to Highway 89. On the east is the newly amalgamated municipality of Bradford West Gwillimbury, which now takes in Highway 27 and the communities and lots adjoining, formerly in Tecumseth. Adula remains, its borders unchanged, to the west. New Tecumseth retains the three communities of Tottenham, Beaton, and Alliston, and a growing population of 20,300.
This has always been a rural community. The towns that have established in the villages, the village of Tottenham and Beaton, basically the farmers went into these urban centers to sell their wares or have them delivered by train to the markets in Toronto. I think in the last, probably since about 1970, like other areas of the province, this has become a bedroom community for Toronto. People come up here for various reasons, but I think a lot of them are getting away from the big city life. They like the slower, rural, rustic appearance, and they like to be able to work in the city and come home to a little bit of sanity.
Tecumseth was once part of the frontier, its first settlers pioneers in Upper Canada. The forests provided their homes, their crops grew, the villages were built. Now we are part of a changing scene, New Tecumseth. We too are pioneers, working out a mutually supportive rural and urban life, inspired and invigorated by the richness of the land and the strength of the communities handed down to us by those who have come before. Our past is the heritage the present preserves and passes on to the future. The challenge, then, is to preserve our heritage and land, planning our changing town with sensitivity, intelligence, and integrity. Our town of New Tecumseth, the new town with a long past.